values have been kind of a laissez-faire kind of nomenclature. Like what is a value? A value is just a player you like more than someone else. Then I tried some math and I didn't like it at all, so I hit up Matt Spencer, who works over there at RotoViz and does a lot of work, and we're going to look at that method and then look at who the consensus DLF Superflex ranks spit out versus DLF Superflex ADP for 2022. So buckle up.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind? Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once.
Yeah, I'm going to do the nerdy bit. I don't know if you're all going to quit the channel while I do it. The problem with the difference between positional ranks or overall ranks in an individual ranker's dynasty ranks versus Superflex is it's not linear. If you're ranking like Elijah Moore as wide receiver 21, that's significantly higher than ADP, which places them around wide receiver 30 overall. But you also have to remember that in Dynasty, we tend to value, especially when you go to trade for them, about 20 wide receivers as top 24 wide receivers, well outside the wide receiver 15 in ADP, and so value doesn't quite say it. So what we need is some kind of estimation of the logarithmic scale of how much players actually mean to us and how valuable that pick actually is. Now, a good way of looking at that, I think, is to consider the projections per ADP. Now, if I skip over some of this video and go over into my draft sheet, we can map projections versus ADP. Now, my projections in my draft sheet are essentially just the average points scored for that particular position rank, and so it does a pretty decent job of showing the scale of expectation based on where we're drafting a player. And as you can see, the linear trend line doesn't actually work when you're looking at ADP. It looks ridiculous, and there's a big curve and a line cutting it in half. It doesn't make sense. It's not actually following the trend. But if we switch that trend line to a logarithmic scale, then what happens is it actually maps out the value of that of ADP more accurately. You can see with this orange line that you want a much higher expectation with those earlier picks and those lower picks, and you can see that curve right there, that like distinct bend, is called a logarithmic trend. Now, what we need is to apply that to rankings differences. So if you're ranking a player 10 spots different in the first 50 picks, that's a lot more significant than if you're ranking a player 10 spots different in the lower 200s, or even the lower 100s for that matter, or even the lower 90s. I don't know why I'm obsessed with this scale. And that's essentially what I did. Matt just said use a base 10 log formula, and after I googled that for a while and then had him explain it to me even slower, what I did is I did the logarithmic value of the difference between positional ranks and overall ranks and combined them. All that's doing, it sounds fancy, but all it's doing is mapping the value difference of early picks compared to later picks onto those positional ranks differences. Clear? No. Okay. One other thing I wanted to point out that Matt mentioned to me while I was learning and trying this out was that I'm using simple language. I'm saying that players we're drafting significantly above ADP once adjusted for that expectation of where they're being drafted, so all those values should be similar estimations. If a player is 20% over ADP in the second round and 20% over in the 10th round, there is still the same significant difference because it's adjusted for that difference in ADP. But something Matt mentioned is that the value and avoid list doesn't actually cover what this is actually showing. Essentially, you could actually flip that on its head, because if we're drafting a player significantly below ADP, so we're avoiding them, what we're essentially doing is giving that value to anyone else we're drafting with. So the values could actually be the players we are quote-unquote avoiding, because ADP tends to be fairly good. So what I went, one of the things I've done while looking through different rankings at DLF is consider how closely individual rankers are to ADP. What I found was I'm one of the closest to ADP, but the winner is actually John H., who's like a third difference ranker. You probably see him pop up in the video at some point. His ranks correlate to ADP by about 71%, and whereas mine are 75, 76%, depending on how I've tweaked them. Both of us are about 10% above everyone else in the rankings. I was surprised. I thought I was going to be more drastically different because I'm so independent-minded, but it does make sense because my whole thing, my mantra when it comes to drafting and also playing Dynasty is to take very few shots against ADP, but do it significantly, like be significantly above the crowd. So make very few bets, but do them strongly and hit at a high rate. That tends to be what I try and do in Dynasty, so it makes sense. On that game, technically John H, whoever John H is, at DLF, is actually beating me at it because his ranks correlate to ADP a little bit more, and he's taking fewer shots and doing them, and he's not doing them more strongly, actually, but I thought that was interesting. Again, you can check out DLF ADP, probably at a link below in the description. I'm also writing this up. I've already done it for Patreons looking at my ranks, and I'm writing it up using the consensus DLF ranks for DLF. So I thought what we would do in this video, not to make it just a long video where a guy makes a graph and talks about making a graph, is actually look at some of the more interesting values that popped up while looking at consensus ADP. The first thing I noticed is that we are, as a group, and my rankings definitely reflect this, taking strong shots above ADP on second-year wide receivers who did pretty good in their first year. This is something we've talked about over and over again on the podcast and the channel and on my Twitter account, that sophomore wide receivers who have good rookie seasons, and there are different measures you can apply to what is a good rookie season, but for now we'll just leave it there, are like the lifeblood of Dynasty. Jalen Waddle, Davonte Smith, and Elijah Moore are, by consensus, significantly higher in our rankings than they are in ADP. Based on different rankers, you can see that some are higher and lower, but it's one of the reasons it's really hard to be higher on Elijah Moore, because anyone who's actually sharp and paying attention really wants to make sure they draft him above everyone else, and we're all kind of playing this arms race of who's willing to push Elijah Moore up the highest. Right now, I think Ryan McDowell's winning because he's got him as like the wide receiver 14 or so on average, and it's the same with Davonte Smith, who's drafted 99th overall in ADP. We as a group are drafting him 60th overall, and Jalen Waddle 44th overall, but we as a group are drafting him 23rd overall. I do think I'm highest on Jalen Waddle though, so yay me. The second interesting value that popped up is actually one I've changed my rankings to disagree with. As a group, we were 100% taking Josh Allen below Patrick Mahomes, but consensus ADP puts Josh Allen as a QB1 and Patrick Mahomes as a QB3. Interestingly, despite talking about this on Twitter, no one really asked who was a QB2, and it's Justin Herbert, by the way. Although there is one interesting ranker who was taking Lamar Jackson as the number 1 overall. Alright, the next thing I want to point out is older wide receivers. Again, older wide receivers do stick out as a group that the consensus rankers are willing to go higher than the consensus ADP. The most notable is Tyreek Hill. He's been drafted 45th overall by consensus ADP, and as a group, the rankers are taking him 22nd overall. As a group, none of us are taking him outside the top 12. I think I'm lowest on him. I have as a wide receiver 12. Most have him in that 8 to 10 range. And so, yeah, an older wide receiver we fully expect to maintain top 12 production, or at least have top 12 value next year, perhaps. I'm slightly lower on him than the group, but I'm still significantly higher on him than ADP. But again, you can find a few different examples of this. Older wide receivers that are proven producers tend to fall by consensus ADP a lot more than they fall by consensus rankings, because we know they keep producing more than the group tends to like. Alright, and just a few quick notes. The next thing I note in consensus ADP is George Kittle. Almost as a group, we are willing to take about 10-15 spots higher than ADP, but it's actually difficult to find significant tight end differences, because again, Superflex and Superflex rankers both know that outside the top few tight ends, there's not a lot of difference there, so we want to take relatively few shots and not even make them that strongly. But Evan Ingram sticks out, and so does Noah Fant as someone that we are willing to take. Alright, so I guess I'll leave on running backs, like what running back values show up. Well, I told you about this. This is one of the first videos I made this offseason, so I sure hope you paid attention to it. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, according to the consensus rankers at DLF, all the Superflex rankers, all 7 of us, is our highest value at the running back position this year. David Montgomery also shows up after that, and also like lower level players like Myles Gaskin, who's been taken, like barely taken at all. 229th is his ADP, which means he doesn't really have an ADP. That's as low as DLF ADP tends to go. And as a group, we're willing to take him right in the 170s. It's a throwaway late round pick, but we still think he might start some games and has some value, and so he shows up as one of the players we're willing to do. Alright, let me know what you think. Check out the Patreon article. article, or check out the DLF article when it drops to see more, and also to go to the sheet, because I actually made the sheet and put a link in the article so that you can do your own rankings or dig down deeper into the Dynasty Superflex rankings at DLF to see who we like and who we don't like, and maybe I missed someone. And yeah, like and subscribe if you don't mind, if you want to, whatever. Really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again in the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind? Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once. I am one of those, skeptical of status quo, lazy and to the bone, no doubt about it.